Hi, I'm Ven. Welcome to my book corner, and today we have another indie book review for you. This is for the Sci-Fi fantasy book, A Dirge for Cascius. This is by Calum Lott. Comes in at 428 pages long for the Kindle ebook version. It's also available in paperback and hardcover, and this originally released on August 2nd of 2024. As always, we shall talk a little bit about the story, the characters, the world building, and the presentation before my final thoughts at the end of the video, so let's just dive straight in. At its heart, this is a detective mystery story in a hi-fi setting, as we follow our titular character of Cascius as he embarks on another investigation. Now, Cascius as a character we'll touch on momentarily. All I'm going to say here is haunted both from his origins and his past. And a group called the Sages reach out to him. They're a quasi-religious group that he has worked with multiple times in the past to solve the murder of some of their high priests, basically, on a couple of different locations. There is a condition to this, however, because they realise that Cassius requires some sort of spiritual healing, and that is that he takes a young, kind of, not trainee, that's unfair, but another young investigator under his wing within this investigation, and this is an Ilwavan called Kirella, who reminds him very much of one of his previous partners. And over the course of this acts as a healing journey for Cassius first and foremost, and for Corella as well. But you go on to multiple locations as they investigate what's happening. This begins to dovetail into, first off, a story of personal healing and confronting your own trauma, and it does that beautifully. But also you have the investigation aspect and how this links into Cassius's personal history. In many ways, the mystery aspect takes a secondary part to Cassius's personal journey, which I personally do love, but it does act as a natural progression framework for Cassius's personal journey in that regard, as things link back to his own past, and he's forced to actually deal with his own trauma, whilst also developing a bond with someone for the first time in decades at this point. It's also a really well done mystery. There's a few good red herrings in there as well, and it all gets tied together by the character beats and the world building, I should say. So, a very, very good framework for this one. The broken cop finding redemption, investigating something that links to their own past with a new partner is not an unusual sort of trope to come across. But with the setting of this as well, it works exceptionally well to drive the character beats forward. Where this story shines for me personally is in the character work, specifically around Cassius, although it is fair to say that Corella as well has a great deal of development, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of that in book 2 as well, as it kind of in some ways feels like Cassius has come full circle by the end of this. So Cassius as a character is very, very trauma laden. They were born in the flames of a planetary genocide. They ended up becoming a renowned investigator and unraveling the mysteries that most people didn't think anyone would ever be able to, and earning kind of this reputation for very much this brilliant maverick investigator. Discovered what caused the destruction of his world, but upon discovering what caused it, did lose people very, very close to him. And that is the central theme for this. It's his own healing and facing his own trauma. Since the things that happened, he's refused to take on a partner, refused to bond with anyone else, and lived a very lonely existence, with the only reason for his existence being distraction to kind of investigate various different things. And he only does them as a distraction. He lives alone on this planet. All that he's had on this planet that is dead is one tree that still blooms, and at some point that tree dies as well. And that is a very, very key point of the story. We'll get back to that in a bit. And you have this period where he's told, look, we've got this really interesting thing. You're the best person for it, but you're not in a good place. You're just so burdened with your own guilt and you need somebody with you. So take this person. They're the only person in X amount of time to come near your scores in terms of your ability to investigate. And they take on Corella. Now, Corella has their own sort of demons in their past, and we only get little bits and pieces in here, but it does add some good bonding moments to the two of them. But Corella as well is unusual in that he was brought up by, or they were brought up, I should say, by humans. And that's really interesting because that's unusual. So you have this alien who is the same species as Cassius's previous partner that they lost. And so you've got the constant reminder there and some of the things to do with how this race bonds with people. But on top of that, because you have that reminder, you then have the human elements of the pushback, and that works really, really well. Corella is not taking any of Cassius's shit. Wants to learn from him, certainly, but he also is more than aware of how damaged Cassius is and why they are actually there on this case. And you see these moments of brilliance where Cassius is almost kind of goading Corella to kind of prove themselves, and is quite condescending to begin with, until Corella saves him. And you have this moment of, okay, they spotted the signs before I did. Maybe there's something worthy here. And you have this continuing bond that builds and builds and builds and really does pay off towards the end of the book. But this also forces confrontation for Cassius's personal guilt for what's happened in the past, his own self-blame, his own addictions as well. This is somebody who has been wallowing in sorrow amongst other things and has very much kind of clipped their own wings in many regards. And as the story progresses, you kind of feel this giving up and then this anger feeling the need to give up start to really build, and this determination to prove people wrong when things sort of turn south about halfway through the book. But also, there's some moments of true revelation in here. There's one chapter in particular to do with the tree and the reason the tree dies, and Corella just turns around and goes, look, you know why that tree died. You know what happened. You just won't admit it to yourself. And you have this chapter which is so heart-wrenching that nearly made this a 5-star read just on that one chapter alone for me. So, spoiler from when we get to the end of the video for my final thoughts. And the whole journey of healing from these, and, you know, healing is not finished by the end of this by any stretch of the imagination, but the journey that Cassius goes through is so wrought and so painful and so raw that you can't help but be captivated by it. And very much for me personally, that is what the true driver of this is and why I like this book so much. World building and setting then, and I really like the setting of this, and I do know that Calum Lott has done other books set within this same universe as well, which I have not picked up yet, but I'm excited to do, because this universe is really, really interesting to read. It manages to do something that a lot of sci-fi struggles with, which is marrying that element of sci-fi and religion in a way that is believable. And I really do appreciate that. There's a real spiritual element to a lot of the stuff that goes on in here, even so much as taking off into space and traveling between the stars has almost a divine feeling to it in many regards. And I really do like that. And I like to see that applied well in sci-fi. And it does feel like a living, breathing world that has come through almost the end times in many ways. It feels like you have these little pockets of society that have their conflicts and have their beliefs and don't quite mesh well together because of how different they sometimes are, which again works really well and helps drive some of the central conflicts. We also get plenty of flashbacks, and a lot of the world building here is built through Cassius's own eyes and their own experiences in things like the war and their own investigations and the technology and the things that they can do and some of the skills that they have, which does potentially create an unreliable narrator challenge here simply because of the type of character that Cassius is. Very much a glass is completely empty sort of character in many regards. But it does work very well for informing the world. Now, it isn't necessarily, however, all plain sailing here. This does at times have an issue that a lot of science fiction books have, which is in terms of terminology. Especially early on, this throws a lot of terms at you and you have no idea what they mean. Um, Fortunately, it does get over that relatively quickly as we begin to see some of these terms actually being used in a practical sense, so you begin to understand what certain terms mean. But it does have initially quite a steep barrier to entry to bear in mind, and that can be a turn off for some people. It doesn't take too long to get through it, but it is worth mentioning here that if you start reading this and you hit this, like, what the hell do all these words mean? You'll find out pretty soon and it will start making sense. The other thing as well is the sense of consequence that this has. This feels dangerous for our investigators, and that is, again, something that we don't always see in a lot of fiction, where, and it's something I've spoken about before, where there is a sense that something could go horribly, horribly wrong for our main characters here and people around them. And at times it really, really does. And I like that. I like the sort of meaty feel of consequences in my world building. And then that links in really well to the ending of this. You get the sense of, you know what, the war might have ended, but the hostility never really did. And you get the more shadowy side of the societies as well. So this is a really well realized universe, perhaps benefiting from the fact that you're going to have multiple stories based within the same universe that branch off and are not directly related to this one, which again is a form of storytelling that I personally really like. I like settings where you have all these disjointed stories. Something that I personally do when I do my D&D games is I have designed a setting and I have different bits and pieces pulled from around and set stuff in different places for super short, like one-shots or short campaigns. And then they inform the lore of the world like later on, and you have these very tenuous links, but it helps the universe feel lived in. And I really like this. I think this is a really, really engaging world or universe, I should say, to be a part of. This brings us to presentation. First off, cover, stunning. I am going to have to get a physical edition of this book because I want this book on my shelf. In terms of the writing style, this is a rare example of a book whose prose made me want to read it out loud. Part of that is because you have these unfamiliar terms and I wanted to kind of feel the sound of them, if that makes sense. But the way this is written feels like it should be almost spoken or bellowed out loud. It's very few books that get me feeling like that. On top of that, you have this really interesting narrative pacing going on because this is not an especially fast-paced book, but you have a sense of inertia driving it all the way along. It does feel like you have a ticking clock, even when you have moments where the characters don't seem to be rushing, and then the characters acknowledge it's like, look, we're not going to save the next person. So we're getting this bit right because they're already dead. There's nothing we can do about that. We just need to make sure we're learning the right things here and now. So I like that. I like the acknowledgement of you can't save everybody. And also the way the steps are taken in terms of both the narrative and the character work just are lock and step all the way along. And then you'll briefly have this disjointed moment that sort of you have the fallback for the character as a narrative beat that works really, really well. And then that normally will kick into a flashback where we get some insight into Cascius's past and the previous traumas. So it all just flexes into each other exceptionally well, with each individual point feeding the other, wrapped up in this really strong prose, which I really do appreciate. So, if in case it's not clear, I think this is amazingly well written, very smartly paced, and the way it interconnects is incredibly well done as well. This will not be a surprise to anyone who has listened to this point. I really like this. The biggest compliment I can ever give a book or an author is I've read one of their books and I've immediately gone out and bought another one. which is what I've done with this. I've already gone out and bought a coma, and I know another book has come out very recently as well, which I will also be picking up. Number one, because the covers are phenomenal, but also this book is exactly my sort of sci-fi. It is dark, it's gritty, it's gruesome in places. The pacing is really smartly done and is inconsistent in the best way possible. You have these amazing character beats. You have this fascinating sort of growing chemistry between our main character and their sidekick, who is a fully realized character as well within this fully realized universe. And, I don't think it's too much to say that I think that this has my favorite chapter of a book that I've read this year, which is chapter 25, which really just drives home what drives Cascius as a character and why they are as they are, and that moment of realization that's in that chapter. Just so powerful. It falls just short of a 5-star for me, simply because of the issue that a lot of sci-fi has with all the terminology early on. But I will be rereading this again at some point in the not too distant future after I've read the other book set in the same universe and before part 2 comes out to reacquaint myself. And I will not be surprised if at that point I up it straight to a 5 stars, but I have docked it a quarter of a star just for that barrier to entry potentially. Didn't bother me too much though, so this still gets a 4.75 stars out of 5 for me. Is in my top 5 reads of the year right now. Well, that is my thoughts on a Dirge for Cascius by Calum Lott. If this sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments down below. And if you have any sci-fi recs for me, let me know those as well. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I should catch you all soon.